We are live. Welcome to Liberal Discourses, the space on X, where we take the opportunity to explore topics that may not be getting enough attention. My name's Vanessa. I'll be your host for this evening as we explore the Alberta Next panel and their proposals as they undertake a province-wide consultation to chart their path, secure their economy, and assert their sovereignty within a united Canada. This is the sixth and final episode of the 6-week series that covers each of the ideas that has been proposed by the Alberta Next panel. Tonight, we're talking about the Constitution. I'm joined, as always, this evening by my three panelists, Val, Steve, and Josh. Each of them has a different take on the issue of Alberta sovereignty and independence, so this should be an interesting conversation. I'd like to ask all of them to quickly come up and introduce themselves and where they stand on the issue of Alberta. We'll start with Val, and then we'll go with Steve, and then Josh. So welcome, Val. How are you this evening?
I'm great. I'm doing great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm Val. I have a very strong background in finance. I was in it for about 15 years running a company. And on the issue of Alberta sovereignty, I'm certainly in support of Alberta independence. However, I would accept more provincial jurisdiction being the outcome of that endeavor.
All right. Well, thank you. Steve, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself and welcome this evening. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Vanessa. My name is Steve. Just a regular Joe, part-time, quarter-time podcaster. And my take on the Alberta independence movement and its position within Canada, or as a province that is they should work towards the decades-long process of trying to become the 51st state. But after what I saw today on the Alberta Next panel, or this week, I should say, is that they are Alberta and Canada are more, they belong together more than I originally thought.
Well, thank you, Steve, and I'm looking forward to exploring more of that particular stance of yours this evening. Good evening, Josh. Please tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Hello, Vanessa. Hello, everybody in the audience. I'm Josh for Canada. Thank you all for joining us this evening. As you know, I live here in the St. Lawrence Lowlands, the GTA of Ontario. And on this particular issue of Alberta sovereignty, after 5 episodes, I can conclusively say now that this here initiative is I'm not going to use the expression of pipe dream, but it doesn't seem to benefit the majority of Albertans. So at this point, my position on the issue is fairly concrete now, Vanessa. I think we've seen enough here, and we're going to get into the Constitution issues, but I think I've seen enough here to make a judgment call on this particular issue. Alberta's going nowhere, and it's for the best of Albertans. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Josh. Now, because the Alberta government isn't here to represent themselves and with the aim of being fair to them, I'm going to play the Alberta Next video on the topic of the Constitution. That way, everybody will have a few minutes to listen, settle in, and prepare to discuss this extremely large and important topic.
The Alberta Next panel is touring Alberta to hear from Albertans on how our province can better protect ourselves from Ottawa's economic attacks while building a more prosperous, strong, and sovereign Alberta within Canada. A provincial referendum on some of these ideas is coming in 2026. But what's on that referendum ballot and what happens next for Alberta is up to you. One idea being discussed by the panel is Alberta taking a lead role in working with other provinces to pressure the federal government to amend the Canadian Constitution to empower and better protect provincial rights. The Canadian Constitution, including its Charter of Rights of Freedoms and sections on the division of powers between the federal and provincial governments, is foundational to our democracy. The enforcement of the Constitution by governments and the courts ensures our rights and freedoms are protected, and that our provincial and federal governments generally function as they should. But no document is perfect. Some things that made sense 150 years ago may no longer make sense today. That is why the Constitution contains an amending formula that permits the Constitution to be altered should enough provinces and the federal government agree to it. Over the last decades, several outdated and unfair problems with the Constitution have been identified, but no tangible progress has been made to fix them, due primarily to a lack of federal and provincial leadership. Examples of proposed constitutional reforms include the following. 1. Amending the division of powers to indicate that core areas of provincial jurisdiction, including over natural resources and health, are immune from federal legislation, and to also ensure that in shared areas of jurisdiction, such as agriculture and immigration, provincial laws prevail over federal ones. 2. Imposing constitutional limits on the federal spending power in areas of provincial jurisdiction, including a provincial right to opt out of federal spending measures with proper compensation should they so choose. 3. Adhering strictly to representation by population in the House of Commons. Right now, those living in smaller provinces are greatly overrepresented when compared to those living in larger ones. 4. Either abolishing the Senate entirely or having it actually represent provincial interests as originally intended by mandating an elected Senate with the same amount of senators representing each province. 5. Allowing provinces to appoint their own King's Bench and Court of Appeal justices, rather than having those appointments made by the federal government. 6. Expanding the Supreme Court to allow for more justices from Western Canada and making prior service on a province's Court of Appeal a mandatory requirement of becoming a Supreme Court justice. 7. Eliminating the Ottawa residency requirement for judges on federal courts to ensure more Western Canadian representation. And 8. Mandating provincial approval of the appointment of a lieutenant governor to a province by the federal government. There are, of course, many other potential constitutional amendments that are worth discussion, but this is a start. So, should Alberta take a lead role in working with other provinces to pressure the federal government to amend the Canadian Constitution in order to empower and better protect provincial rights? And if so, which of the amendments discussed or other proposals should the Alberta government advocate for? For more information, visit alberta.ca/next.
All right, so there we go. And I think right from the get-go, I'd like to get our panel's impressions of that ad. And I'd very much like to start with Steve.
Yeah, I mean, listening to that again, I just got more ideas. And, well, just this last time listening to it, is that whoever put this together sounds just like the 20th century progressives in America that really set the groundwork for the modern Democratic Party. And I'm thinking of people like Woodrow Wilson and John Dewey, Teddy Roosevelt. And it's kind of incoherent on Alberta's part is because the progressive movement was an attempt to basically drive the United States away from their founding and into more of a Canadian model. And here Alberta kind of rejects the Canadian model, but yet when you listen to what they say about the Senate and the Supreme Court, which I think we'll get to later, so I'll save that, they're not moving towards the founding either. So it's just so incoherent. It's just so progressive. And it's kind of like, I don't know what direction they're going with it. And so another thing that I thought of earlier before is that I just noticed how futile and academic this whole exploration of what Alberta can do to exercise more sovereignty within United Canada really is. It's virtually impossible to achieve any of it, but I won't fault them for trying. They should try. I mean, everybody, you can't fault anyone for trying to make something better, but it's more of their display of the total lack of understanding of their issues and governance in the first place. So just like every other, just like how they introduced every other topic, the Alberta Next panel has framed Ottawa as Alberta's arch nemesis. And I'll quote what they said: protect ourselves from Ottawa's economic attacks. But that's not the real issue. The real issue lies with the other provinces. I've said this in another space on this liberal discourses who benefit from the current constitutional setup, and they have little incentive to change it. Thus, the leading question, should Alberta take a lead role in working with other provinces? Yeah, blah, blah, blah. I think we all remember. It's an absurdity because of all the other provinces, except for maybe Saskatchewan, are content with the status quo. And also they downplay the significant hurdle of the amending formula, but I'm sure we'll get into that too, so I'll leave it there.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. Yes, one of the things that seems to keep coming up is a reference to the ads, that they are insufficient. So we can go into that a little bit in a little bit. Val, what is your impression?
I looked at it a little bit differently than Steve. I looked at it more like the ask for all of the constitutional changes and ideas are just so enormous that they are potentially looking at acting more like a state in the United States, where they have sovereignty and control over almost every single aspect, and moving away from having the federal government even having any piece of jurisdiction or a very limited amount of influence in the province. And, I'm all for that because, Alberta independence. But it's a huge ask, and Steve's absolutely correct when he's talking about, will other provinces go for this? I mean, it would be an absolute miracle if a lot of these were ever achieved or imposed. But it is worth trying, as Steve pointed out as well. I think they did it on purpose. Same with the entire panel, having so many issues to talk about, having so many issues that might be on a referendum. I think it's intentional. I think it's a negotiating tactic. Put it all out there. Make the biggest, offer you can on the bargaining table. And if you can achieve some of what you've put out there, then it's a success.
Well, and every topic that we've looked at so far, they're not insignificant. It doesn't matter if it's the RCMP, the pensions, federal transfers, or Alberta taking over personal income tax. All of them are, just to take on singly, are quite significant. So there is that. Josh, what are your thoughts on what the Alberta Next panel is exploring?
Sure. First, I'd like to provide a summary. So the question, the referendum proposal question here is: should Alberta take a lead role in working with other provinces to pressure the federal government to amend the constitution to empower and better protect provincial rights? We have to remember here that these referendum questions, whatever they are going to be in the year 2026, whatever the questions are, they are going to be decided by Daniel Smith and the cabinet. And one of the things in this video that sort of was kind of like a cloak, they cloaked this very skillfully, is that they provided the illusion that the people of Alberta are the ones who are going to determine what the referendum questions are in the year 2026. And in actuality, that is false. So, that being said, they go on to outline the 8 constitutional amendments that they are going to pursue. Number 1 is the division of powers. Number 2 is constitutional limits on federal spending, power in areas of provincial jurisdiction. I'm going to be brief just for the sake here. They're also going to be considering representation by population. They want to abolish the Senate. They want provinces appointing judges. They want more Western judges on Supreme Court. They want to eliminate Ottawa residency requirements for federal judges. And last but not least, they want the provinces to appoint the lieutenant governor generals. So those are 8 proposals, and I imagine that we are going to go through these particular proposals, and we are also going to consider the 5 different amendment procedures that are outlined in our Constitution. That's right, there are 5. So overall, I thought that the video was a bit misleading with respect to these referendum questions. I want to say these are going to be determined by Daniel Smith and the cabinet. So it's a bit misleading that way, but otherwise, they outlined their objectives fairly clearly. So thank you. I'll pass it back to you, Vanessa.
All right. Well, thank you, Josh. Yes. Well, when it comes to this Alberta Next panel, what they're putting forward right now is the ideas to the public, which, of course, they're going to be giving feedback on in the Alberta Next panel surveys that are being conducted online, and of course, in the various meetings that are happening and taking place over the next several weeks around the province as well. So, as time goes on, perhaps there will be more pointed questions being leveled at the panel. Certainly, there hasn't really been too much at this point in time. It's been more concerned with RCMP and pensions, I've noticed. Anyways, what we'll get to first, I guess, is the individual ideas that they're putting forth in here, like amending a division of powers to indicate the core areas of provincial jurisdiction, including over natural resources and health, are immune from federal legislation, and to ensure that the shared areas of jurisdiction such as agriculture and immigration, provincial laws prevail over federal ones. I want to get your thoughts on that, panel. Do you think any of that is even possible, plausible? How much of that is really not so much an attempt to establish jurisdiction, but basically remove the federal oversight? Do you think it's even possible?
We can't really jump into each of these 8 points without considering the amendment formula. Each one of these points here, Vanessa, falls under a different purview under our Constitution. So they are all amendments in essence. But in order to make these amendments happen, you may fall into one of the 5 different amendment procedures. And I think it is important to note Section 41A of our Constitution, which outlines unanimous approval of Parliament and the legislative assemblies of 10 provinces. So, Section 41 lists the subjects that can only be amended by unanimous consent. Okay. Unanimous consent of the provinces has never happened since 1982. So the topics here that fall under section 41, I think we might as well just strike them from the record. And starting up here, we can say abolishing the Senate. That we might as well drop that one. We can have a discussion about it, but it's useless. More Western judges on Supreme Court. That's section 41. That's gone. And provincial appointment of lieutenant governor. Gone. So, of the 8, 3 of them require unanimous approval from all of the provinces. This has never been done. So, why are they even being proposed? I don't know. But I do think it's important, Vanessa, for us to understand out of these 8 proposals, for each of those proposals, which amendment process needs to be pursued in order to make this a reality.
Pardon me. Okay, so Josh, let me ask you. If this is, you're correct, by the way, the amendment by unanimous consent for these particular points is quite clearly stated. Why do you think Alberta's throwing that out there? Is that to try and entice unanimous consent or interest from the other provinces? Is this strictly PR? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I would like to defer this question to Val because she suggested that there was some political gamesmanship with this here. So I'd be interested to hear what she has to say on this matter.
Okay,
But
except that you brought it up. So because you brought it up, I'm now asking you, and I'd like
okay,
an answer, please.
and I'm deferring the question, but I'll give you a simple answer. It's why are they having it on there? Well, Vanessa, I mean, we can track some of these back. Um, Again, I said this last week. Daniel Smith is inheriting a lot of old junk from the past, and the abolish the Senate proposal here is old junk from the past. This was dealt with by Stephen Harper in 2011, Bill C7. Harper wanted 9-year term limits for senators. He wanted a framework for provinces to hold elections for Senate nominees, and then the prime minister would appoint them. Well, what happened in 2013? The Supreme Court turned it down. 2014, the court ruled that significant reforms like elections or term limits required constitutional amendments with the approval from at least 7 provinces representing 50% of the population. And abolition requires unanimous provincial consent. So this abolished the Senate. This goes back to the firewall letter in a sense, because Harper pursued it, but it wasn't outlined in the firewall letter. Some of these other ones are in the firewall letter as well, like constitutional limits. That's in the firewall letter, and that's it. Actually, out of the 8, only one is actually in the firewall letter, which is interesting, and that's constitutional limits on federal spending, and that was also in the fair deal panel. So so I think that the option here that I think Albertans really want, I guess, is constitutional limits on federal spending power in areas of provincial jurisdiction. Harper wanted that, Kenny wanted that, and now Smith wants that. So pardon me for speaking at length here, but you did force the question there. But again, I'd like to hear what the other panelists have to say.
Well, Steve has his hand up here, so we'll go to him. Steve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Josh that it's a waste of time talking about the Senate as if anything's going to change. But just mark it down, Vanessa, that we should go back to that because there's other things to talk about within the mindset, which is important. Like to even bring that up is very revealing of a lack of understanding of governance, really. But and to answer Josh's question, the reason why this stuff is being brought up about all this stuff that they can't achieve is just to appeal to, it's for Danielle Smith, just to appeal to her constituents' sentiments. She just wants them to believe that they can achieve any of this. It's no different than the Alberta independence movement and the Alberta Prosperity Project having all these town halls telling people the Clarity Act gives offers a way out of Canada. I mean, if you read section 2, subsection 3, there's no way, and I'm not going to repeat that here. You can just look, people can read that up. We can look it up later if you want. I can do it if you ask me to, Vanessa. But I mean, let me just be clear on the Clarity Act here. I mean, it's like the Hotel California line by the Eagles. It's basically enshrined that you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And that's what all of these, like the 750th rule and what Josh brought up, section 41, it's the same thing. Like you could check out anytime you like, but you're never leaving and you're never changing anything like this. And I think it's really important for people to understand the truth of the situation and not live in la la land, as Josh mentioned in his opening statement.
All right. Yeah, I would have to concur that there certainly would be an uphill battle at minimum. Val, Josh fielded the question to you. Really, he refused to, decline to, or demurred to answer. What are your thoughts on the reason why Alberta Next would put in these things that require unanimous consent?
Well, I would say that it probably reflects the sentiments of many Albertans who have seen the federal government split away from policies and actions that help the prosperity of the province. And so when there was that divergence, Albertans kind of got a little pissed off, and they've been pissed off for quite some time, right? So I would say it's in response to that. It is a general feeling of wanting the province to be prosperous. And in these specific areas, specifically around the Constitution, it has to do with control. So if Alberta is unable to control the direction of some of its industries and economies and healthcare and other areas, because it's madly influenced by federal policy or federal, interjection of their what they want and their policies, it's a power struggle. And I think Alberta, has a lot of people right now that are saying enough is enough. We're tired of that. The federal government is not supposed to be standing in the way of provinces, succeeding and excelling in the industries and steps that they're taking to further themselves. The federal government was not set up or designed or intended to be that way. So you have a lot of sentiment there for the Alberta people. So I think it's reflective of that. However, I also would say that it's put out there for the exact reasons that we're talking about here. It is likely impossible to achieve many of these things. And maybe it's designed to be on this panel to just show not only Albertans and Canadians how inflexible our system is. We might have something in the Constitution that allows us to amend the Constitution, but it's impossible to achieve. So maybe it's meant to highlight that even if a province is at a point where some of these things should be changed, that it's next to impossible to achieve.
I just thought of something here too, by the way. The only way you'd ever amend the Constitution is if you make it more progressive, just like the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms did. It made the country more progressive, more socialist, more post-national, and that's what 7/50 of the provinces and whatever other things that Josh found that were required to make an amendment. Those are the only things that get passed that will ever get amended. To reverse any of that is never going to happen. The country is way too far gone, especially when you need Ontario or Quebec to be involved. I mean, those are only two provinces that matter, really, when you think about it.
Right. And so maybe the entire purpose of this particular Alberta Next panel discussion around constitutional changes, not only are some of these highly important and would be exceedingly beneficial to not only Alberta, but all of Canada if they got changed. But maybe it's meant to highlight not only to Alberta Canadians, but maybe the world, how inflexible this is, And if some of these did get passed, it would help Alberta. If some of them don't, maybe it helps Alberta's independence movement on the world stage.
You're a lot more optimistic than me. I just think it's total pandering and populism, and if it was if it were about showing Albertans and anybody else, there'd be a lot more education involved as to what the actual problem is, because it's not really Ottawa per se. Like it's really because the country is completely left wing. Like it's so socialist, right?
Well, I'm not sure that's necessarily the place you want to land totally and completely when it comes to assessing what's wrong with our country or needs perhaps some adjustment. But the one thing that you have pointed out, which is correct, if Alberta were to try and pursue constitutional reform under the 750 rule, it would need the support from either Ontario or Quebec to do it. With Alberta and the other 8 provinces, excluding those two, the support population-wise would still be well under 50%. Ontario has 39% of the population of Canada, and Quebec has 22. So, there's no two ways about it. So, Steve, you did mention earlier there were some things that had come to your attention about this process of constitutional reform, and I'd like to hear more from you about that.
Sorry, I missed the last sentence.
No worries. I said that you were mentioning earlier about there were some things that had struck your attention when it came to the matter of constitutional reform, and this is a good time to bring them out now.
Yeah, we touched on it. I mean, it was the 7/50 rule. What I thought was hilarious was the video. If you watch it, and you're not actually listening, if you just go watch it, it literally shows a yellow highlighter highlighting a portion of the text from what I assume is the Government of Canada's website. And the yellow highlighter stops 5 words to the left of the phrase 7/50 formula. So it's saying to you that, and I quote, "The Constitution contains an amending formula that permits the Constitution to be altered should enough provinces and the federal government agree to it." And then it conveniently stops right there to inform any of its more maybe casual listeners of how impossible this is really going to be. And it's just such a ridiculous. I don't get the point of it, to not be honest.
Well, there have been 2 attempts previously to make reforms of the Constitution. Are any of you familiar with Meech Lake or the Charlottetown Accords?
Well, I wasn't alive then, Vanessa, but it is a compulsory piece of information when approaching these here amendments. We know that Meech Lake and Charlottetown ultimately led to the downfall of Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. So this is the thing. When it came to Meech Lake, this was 1987. So I wasn't even alive then. But the goal here was to get Quebec to sign on to the 1982 Constitution Act. They wanted to recognize Quebec as a distinct society within Canada. They wanted to grant provinces greater veto powers over constitutional changes, increased provincial input on Supreme Court appointments and Senate nominations, and enhance provincial roles in immigration. I guess, this is something that we could all work towards, right, as Canadians. And it required unanimous ratification by all 10 provinces within 3 years. So when they call, apparently, despite there was initial agreement amongst them all, okay, but you had 3 years. And in 1990, the province of Manitoba and the province of Newfoundland withheld approval. And then this led to Quebec separatist, and there was a constitutional crisis. So ultimately, Manitoba and Newfoundland contributed to the downfall of Meech Lake. And then from there, I guess Mulroney was a despised man. The Charlottetown Accord, well, that was 1992. It was a follow-up attempt to resolve the constitutional issues after the Meech Lake failure. And again, it wanted to reaffirm Quebec as a distinct society. They wanted Senate reforms, create a triple E Senate, equal, elected, effective, reduce the powers of the Senate as well, recognize Indigenous peoples' inherent rights to self-government. So we go on, and then, unlike Meech Lake, it was submitted to a national referendum on October 26, 1992. What a time to be alive. And it was rejected. 54.3% of voters nationwide, imagine that, with opposition stemming from perceived favoritism towards Quebec, inadequate reforms, and economic concerns in mid-recessions. Only 4 provinces voted in favor. So Charlottetown was a disaster. Meech Lake failed. So whichever prime minister wants to shoulder this load of constitutional amendments, he is definitely going to be looking at these 2 incidents and saying, is it worth it? Why would I give up all of the power that I have for something that could basically lead to the dissolution of my political career? So you asked for a summary. There's your summary.
Well, thank you, Josh. The one thing that you didn't mention, the Meech Lake Accord would grant each of the provinces and Parliament a veto over constitutional amendments relating to central institutions. And Clyde Wells, who was the Premier of Newfoundland at the time, had 3 particular problems with the Meech Lake Accord. One of them was that the veto clause would make future constitutional amendments practically impossible. His other concern was that restrictions on federal spending would disadvantage the poorer provinces, and that by placing the Distinct Society Clause in the body of the Accord instead of its preamble, the agreement would grant Quebec special legislative status and undermine the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So those were the 3 big ones at the time as to why Newfoundland stayed out of the decision-making process. In Manitoba, it was MLA Elijah Harper who blocked unanimous consent needed for debate and it was on a procedural point. So that's what prevented ratification in Manitoba. But to get back to it, it seems like the the idea of restricting federal spending seems to keep coming up. Now, we've done other topics when it comes to federal transfers and taxes. What are your thoughts on limiting or making the suggestion to limit federal spending as far as that goes? What do you think Alberta's trying to suggest? Because they're not terribly clear, unfortunately. I'd like to get Val's opinion.
I mean, it's a huge ask, isn't it? And it's not one that's going to go over well lightly to be asked of the federal government or for a constitutional change. I mean, the idea, again, it just comes down to a power and control struggle. If Ottawa, or the way that the system is currently set up, is not allowing Alberta to do what it wants or needs, then it seems like to me they're just going to a full 100% on just take all the control for yourself. Then, if the federal government isn't going to be receptive to that, right? So I really just I think it all comes down to that. Almost all of the points that are in these suggestions, right? I don't think I have too much more to ask unless you want to reframe the question a little bit.
Well, I can contribute to the inquiry here related to the firewall letter and fair deal panel, because it's this proposition is very vague. So let's put some meat on this. Constitutional limits on federal spending power in areas of provincial jurisdiction. Well, what are those areas of provincial jurisdiction? In the firewall letter, remember, this is key. 2001, Stephen Harper, he's not even elected yet. Him and a group of Albertans, Westerners, made this letter, all these recommendations, gave it to Ralph Klein. It caused a huge stir. Within a year, Stephen Harper's now the leader of the what was it? What was that? It wasn't the Conservative Party. He united the two. PC, I guess. Whatever it was.
Canadian Alliance.
Yeah, there we go. Canadian Alliance. There we go. Thank you. So in the letter, when he's talking about constitutional limits on federal spending, what he says is he wants full provincial control over healthcare policy, replacing federal cash transfers with tax points, and allowing provinces to opt out of federal programs with compensation to curb federal spending influence in provincial areas. That's what it said in the firewall letter. Now, we know Kenny had his fair deal panel, which is basically what the Alberta Next panel is modeled after. It's kind of a continuation. And in the fair deal panel, in recommendation number 16, is very similar to the firewall letter, and 17 is opting out of new federal cost share programs with full compensation. The aim is to limit federal spending intrusions. So when we're considering this here proposition, this is an interesting one because we had the firewall letter supporting it. Now we have the fair deal panel, and now we have the Alberta Next panel. So we need to look at this one with a close eye, and we need to appreciate that Section 38, the 750 rule, 7 provinces, 50% of the population. So can you get 7 provinces to sign on to this? It's a good question, and I think that's what Daniel Smith in Alberta is going to be working towards in the upcoming decades.
Yeah, when you're talking about it sounds like they're trying to make a unilateral move, and I seem to recall, if I remember correctly, it was Meech Lake where Quebec made a similar request. What they wanted was the ability to opt out, basically, of federally created programs, run their own, and just be compensated for it financially. Does that sound like basically what they're trying to do here with Alberta and the Alberta Next panel?
Whatever it is that they are going to do, they are going to have to reckon with the various Supreme Court rulings that could impede their ability to pursue this policy. You could reference the Canada Assistance Plan in BC 1991. I did a brief search on various Supreme Court rulings that could impede each one of these proposals. And I also I also asked, what's the percentage chance of this moving through? given these Supreme Court rulings, this proposal has a 25% likelihood of actually happening, for what it's worth. But just to answer that question, there are a lot of Supreme Court rulings that interfere with just a direct pursuit of some of these amendments. And this is a case here where there are a lot of Supreme Court rulings that would get in the way. So I am surprised that Harper, Kenney, and now Smith are still adamant on this point.
So let me put this out here then, just generally asking my three panelists, how much thought do you think the Danielle Smith government is actually putting into this, rather than just simply referring back to, the firewall letter and Jason Kenney and his little venture there? Is it really just a matter of housekeeping, or is there something more meaty that she's actually really trying to pursue? Is there, aside from what's showing up on the website here?
I'll stick to my opinion that I've held since the beginning, is that very little thought has been put into this. It's just her trying to gauge the separatist or independence movements, see how much traction it's gained, and she needs to readjust maybe in order to get reelected the next provincial election. I don't think there's any.
So you think this is more of an attempt to be a vote winner then?
Yeah, I don't. Danielle Smith is not a dumb person. She knows that this is all inachievable, whichever is the right word. She's just pandering.
Val, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, again, about the Alberta independence. Like, when you have a lot of grievances and issues to deal with, and you're in a position like Alberta is right now, with all the talk of independence and the sentiment in the province of separation and whatnot, you bring everything to the table. You bring all the grievances. You make as much noise as you can. You put it out there. It's a negotiating tactic, and you see where it goes. You do your best with what you got, to be honest. The question you had earlier a little bit about the transfers, and the over the transfer payments and the rights of Alberta doing it itself or whatever, that's necessary for some of the other panel items that we've talked about as well. So it's I mean, who knows where it'll go, but I think they're just throwing everything at it at once to see what changes Alberta can have done.
Or let me add something here. So the reason why I don't think there's much thought into it is because this is going to take decades, especially in a country where there's no uniformed understanding of really anything above that transcends their own tribalism. So there's a similar organization in the United States. It's called the Convention of States, where if you can get 2/3 of the states, you can make amendments to the Constitution. And I just looked this up. They currently have 19 states on board for what they want to do. And so they still have a long ways to go. They're about halfway there. And the United States is a lot more unified across the states than Canada is across its provinces. So, yeah, this is so far away from ever getting accomplished in Canada.
Well, I I have a question for you, all my panelists actually. What I have noticed is that when it comes to Quebec, and this has been they have been very consistent for decades. They have provincial governments and a federal party all working together in unison to push for more provincial autonomy. And in some cases, they've had several referendums on the matter of Quebec secession. What I have noticed that is different when it comes to Alberta is you have Alberta doing the Alberta Next panel, where they're pursuing policies for more provincial autonomy. But there's an independence movement that is working not in concert with. They seem to be fairly intent on attacking the provincial government. Now, do you think that is helping the cause? Are they going to wind up being more of a hindrance? What are your thoughts on the inability to row in the same direction for these two groups?
Are you speaking about the Forever Canada group versus the Alberta Prosperity Project specifically?
Well, actually, the two that I see primarily in my feed are the Alberta Prosperity Project attacking the Daniel Smith and the Alberta Next panel, more Daniel Smith in general. So there seems to be a determination that more provincial control is needed, but you've got friendly fire going on. So I want to get your thoughts on that. Does that help Alberta overall, or does it confuse the message? What's your impression?
I think there's a lot of talk as to whether or not Danielle Smith supports separation or not. And so that's always up in the air as a, which side is she on? And but people don't remember very well that Danielle Smith actually had APP in her corner when she was running for her election campaign. So I'd say that they're on the same page about a lot of things. I think Danielle Smith definitely wants more autonomy for Alberta. And I think they're using it, sure. I mean, the APP wants to push the agenda, their agenda forward, right? So of course they're going to take any opportunity against any group that they see to try and move their agenda forward, including Danielle Smith. You'll notice that it's not done in a way that's malicious, but it's meant to highlight the issue of what needs to be moved forward in the APP agenda. So I think it's for publicity, brings attention to the issue. And I don't see anything wrong with that in terms of trying to go for Alberta independence.
Yeah, I might have an answer there, Vanessa. So in February, I called the Alberta Prosperity Project and I talked to Mitch Sylvester. And when I got off the phone with him, I called my brother-in-law, who is a counselor in Bonnyville, and he thinks this whole Alberta independence movement is just to get the signatures to get the Alberta pension plan moving forward, because it's such a long shot, the independence movement, and he thinks that Mitch Sylvester knows that, but maybe if you can get 600,000 signatures, then that you can take those signatures, put them on the what's that word called? Wow. Anyways, and use those signatures to get the Alberta pension plan passed, which is something that Alberta can actually achieve.
Were you thinking of a plebiscite?
No, definitely not. Petition. That's started with a P, though.
Well, that's very interesting because from what I have seen of the posts, for instance, by, oh God, what's his name? The lawyer with the hat.
Mr. Rath.
Yes, thank you. Jeffrey Rath, thank you. Yeah, he does not seem to be terribly, I mean, I understand he wants to push forward his own project, but it seems like from what I've seen in some instances, he does not see benefit to Alberta pursuing these things in the meantime, as we've explored with the RCMP and the pensions, especially, for instance, that does require a lot of infrastructure to set up. Why do you suppose that they're just simply more interested in public? I mean, in their in their own little propaganda war. Go ahead, Val.
I would say exactly what we've been highlighting today, on especially in the constitutional section of this Alberta Next panel, where it's looking like it's incredibly difficult, if not close to impossible, to get all of these changes done. So for Mr. Rath, his primary answer to this is that there's only one question that needs to be on the referendum, because it's the only question that will actually make any of these changes possible, which has to do with Alberta independence.
And Jeffrey Rath is a kook.
Well, the reason I put this forward is because in some instances, now when we talk about federal transfer payments, for instance, and collecting taxes, especially which help fund those, Quebec has gone ahead and made agreements. Actually, when it comes to the matter of immigration, they have an accord with the federal government. In other words, they're leveraging a lot of what I would say constitutional legal tools to accomplish the same sort of goal, pulling more power from the federal government without going through a full constitutional reform. Now, is this something that Alberta really needs to be perhaps looking at rather than trying to go with full constitutional reform? Josh, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, because I'm just at a loss with where the AP, why this is even relevant. You've outlined it there, but I just want to highlight something here, Vanessa, from the commentary of Albertans at the Edmonton Alberta Next panel. So I watched these panels and I watched the question period. And Albertans, when it came to this particular topic, were talking about the responsibility. Is the province capable of being a responsible government, a sovereign government? And there was a lot of debate surrounding this uh, because Albertans at the present time are not entirely satisfied with their health care, not entirely satisfied with the support for the disabled. They're also not satisfied with education. That's fine. Um, but one of the things that Michael Binion, who was the one of the lawyers on the panel there, outlined was the potentiality of having a constitutional convention in the province, and it's likely that this is going to happen at some point or another, because Alberta and Saskatchewan need to determine how they can represent themselves as being responsible. Michael Binion had said one of the things that Quebec has done throughout our history is demonstrating their willingness and commitment to being responsible, to being sovereign. And we ought not to. Another point that Binion had said here that we need to consider is that in Quebec, there are 44 Liberal MPs. And in between Alberta and Saskatchewan, they have 46 Conservative MPs. The total population of Saskatchewan and Alberta together is 6 million people. In Quebec, you got 8.5 million. So the idea that the West is weak, that it can't work together to achieve some democratic ends is not supported by the numbers here. They do have the democratic power to get some things done. It's just a question of can they formulate a strategy, a cohesive strategy, and can they demonstrate self government in the fashion that Quebec has.
Right then. So to your point about that, Quebec and their focus on responsible government, this is why I asked if Alberta should, instead of concentrating on a constitutional reform, perhaps utilize the same legal, constitutional, and precedents that Quebec has done in order to pull some of these various aspects back into the province under their control, before considering other larger things like pursuing Senate reform and so on, because Quebec does have a track record right from the beginning. When for instance, the Canada Pension Plan was established, they opted out right at the outset. Now, to be fair, there has not been a province that has pulled out since. So there are some legal questions about how to do it. There's not a clear set of instructions in the legislation itself that indicates how a province could become independent after contributing for the better part of 60 years almost. So is it, to my panel now, I'm going to put this: should Alberta really be pursuing these legislative instruments and tools that Quebec has first, rather than attempting a constitutional reform?
I think that Alberta is doing it smart the way they're doing it. It's the moment that there's the most upset, I suppose you could put it as, over how things are happening between Alberta and the federal government, and using that momentum to try and get a lot of things done at once. It would be the way to go. Um, So I think it's just a matter of using this moment. This would be the right kind of circumstance to do it this way.
Steve, what are your thoughts?
I don't really have any on this particular
No worries. I got
question.
some, Steve. So, we've kind of missed something here, Vanessa, with relation to amending the Constitution, and this is something that Daniel Smith was encouraged and enthusiastic about, and this was Section 45, where you don't need any, where basically the legislative assembly of a province can vote to make an amendment. So you need to have your own constitution. My understanding is that you got what, the Alberta Rights Act. BC has their own constitution as well. So within that framework, within the Alberta Rights Act and the BC Charter, whatever it's called, Section 45 can be levied. And I think that is what Daniel Smith and other provinces are going to do moving forward. They're going to try to make incremental changes through Section 45, because through Section 45, you don't need federal approval. You don't need the 750 procedure. You just need your own government, your own legislative assembly to approve on it. So I think there are methods for amendments to the Constitution that can be pursued without amending the Constitution per se. And Daniel Smith outlined this in her recent talk, that this was something they were going to pursue. So I like that strategy for Albertans.
All right, fair enough. I'm going to open it up to the floor in a minute here, but I just want to find out from my panel if they have any last thoughts before we start going to the audience.
I think that a lot of the constitutional changes that are proposed or talked about in the Alberta Next panel are all very serious issues, and they're all very impactful, not only for Alberta, but for Canada. And having some of them changed would be a benefit. It has been a long, long time since our Constitution has been updated. And there are a lot of things in here that need to be talked about. So I am very glad that it's also being brought just to the attention of Canadians that the Constitution should be looked at.
Steve, Josh, any final thoughts on this?
Not really. I'm interested to hear what the audience has to say about this. There's a lot of very wise people in the audience that I can see here, a lot of people from out west. The constitutional pursuit is an inevitability at some point. So I am looking forward to hearing what people have to say regarding these pursuits. Is even though you're going to lose potentially, it's a worthwhile pursuit, isn't it? So which of these solutions you, the audience, looking forward to? You have rep by pop, representation by population. That's a very interesting one. I would suggest that Daniel Smith should consider that formula for the province of Alberta itself for their provincial elections, because my understanding is that the rural parts of Alberta seem to benefit from first past the post. So these little propositions that have been put forward here, they're interesting to me, and I'm looking forward to hear what Albertans have to say. I'll land there. Thank you.
Steve, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I may as well speak since I don't see a hand up yet. One thing that I really struck me, and I'll tie back into my opening statement, how I think Alberta and Canada belong together, is, well, like I said earlier, the panel misidentifies Alberta's real challenges, which isn't really Ottawa, it's the other provinces. But they also have proposed solutions that reveal a deep misunderstanding of governance, which ironically align with the very constitution that they want to reform. So one of those suggestions was to either, quote unquote, either abolish the Senate entirely or, quote unquote, mandating an elected Senate. So that's a misunderstanding of the role of the Senate. And Danielle Smith and Albertans, or she's leading them along with the APP, to think that referendums are good governance, but they are all wrong. Good government protects our natural rights, not just listening to the loudest voices. So although the video is right to believe that the Senate should represent provincial interests, as originally intended, with the same number of senators in each province, which I don't think was ever their original interest. But part of the Senate's role is also to stand up to the people themselves and to prevent them from enforcing their own fancies and whims, such as a majoritarian rule on a referendum question. And so I'll quote a Hillsdale College textbook that I picked up, went through today. Good government is not defined by its responsiveness to popular demands, but is responsible to the true long-term interests of the people. In other words, protect their natural rights, end quote. And that is what makes an unelected Senate the antidote to populism and the counter to the House's short-sighted demands due to their desires to be re-elected every federal election, or even provincial election in the case of Danielle Smith. And so as you brought up in your article that you posted today, I forget what you use, but I call it sober deliberation is the Senate's purpose. You had a different phrase, a more Canadian historical phrase. But they ought to be chosen by the provincial legislatures, and they should also be experienced and knowledgeable, like the video said. But that's a moot point when you clearly don't even understand what the Senate is for, what the Senate should protect, or what your problem with the Canadian Constitution is. It's like they just got lucky, like a clock is right twice a day. And that's the problem. And the problem with the Canadian Constitution is that it doesn't protect an individual's natural rights. So if the Canadian Constitution protected an individual's natural rights, we wouldn't have any of these problems, or the province of Alberta wouldn't. There wouldn't be equalization. The Senate wouldn't be dysfunctional. And there would also already be equal representation in the House of Commons. It's like that's like so like they clearly don't even understand the problem with the whole country and why it's such a burden to them as a province.
Well, it does. Well, that's going back now to original English philosophers like John Locke and so on. These things that drove the American independence way back when. I'm going to bring Val up to co-host, and then we'll start getting to some audience hands here. So just give me 1 second while I do a little bit of housekeeping. All right, and I think we're going to go to James. James, how are you this evening?
Fine, thank you. Yeah, so if I can take a moment, I just have had an opportunity to kind of listen to your discussion here, and I just always would like to offer points. My position regarding vis-a-vis the Senate has always been that it is a useful foil towards populism of the elected House, right? So in the House of Commons, we can get populism. And the purpose, from my view, of the Senate is to balance that populism for the best ideals of your nation. And the issues that have come out of the Senate have been born because of not necessarily finding those in our society who we deem um, best suited for wisdom, but because they have been patronage, and that's where this has truly gone awry. So I think that if a panel of provincial individuals can be designated, that certainly beyond partisan affiliation, one should always be able to find those who are the best stewards of your provincial interest. So I would, and I think that there is a value to almost like from the educational side of things, having people with tenure and a longer range view. I think of the Stoics, for example, in past governments. So that's one of the point. The other point is a lot of the discussion this evening, from my perspective, has talked about the supremacy of the Supreme Court. Whereas I tend to think, and I think Josh was starting to kind of clue into this towards when he was giving consideration to what Danielle might be doing. I think that there is maybe the necessity for us to all give some more consideration. The governance should actually be coming from our legislative bodies, not from the court itself. So I will leave it at that, and I'll let the rest of the people have further discussions. But I just wanted to offer that forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you, James. One of the big things that the Supreme Court of Canada is meant to do is really adjudicate on disputes between provinces and the federal government when it comes to jurisdiction, fine tuning where there perhaps might be some overstepping of bounds and where there shouldn't, rather than the Supreme Court deciding on legislation itself, as in they're not writing it. So there is that. But it is interesting. I was doing a brief little look into some of the previous judgments that were done when the Supreme Court was took over from the oh gosh, what was it called? Um, Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, which was back in London. Originally, at the time, there was complaints that London was basically shooting holes in the Constitution because they were finding very much in the favor of the provinces and decentralization rather than leaning towards the federal government. But what it did wind up doing, of course, was spurring more cooperation between the provinces and federal government to create more robust and better legislation. So there is that. Steve, sorry, I see your hand up, Steve, but we've had a reader who has had their hand up a little bit longer. So I'm going to go to him first, if that's okay.
I hope it's okay because he didn't say anything. I have kind of like two questions I'd really like to look at. There was originally some thought that there would only be one referendum question, which was the Alberta Prosperity Project question. And now we're looking at potential of more. So I'm kind of wanting to hear, I think, from people like yourself, Vanessa, and from Val about one versus multiple questions. And then I'm kind of wondering if Steve Holman was take a moment to kind of look at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because it seems to me like that is certainly one of the reasons why I'm not all that happy with the federal government. It's less about how government works. It's more about the fact that I'll look at the Freedom Convoy. That was all about the fact that the rights and freedoms were being abused by the federal government, and there was no accountability or way to fix that. And that lack of ability to fix the federal government when they when they are deliberately in error drives me nuts. Again, that's my personal opinion. You don't have to ascribe to it. But yeah, just if Steve could talk a little bit more about how he sees this natural right thing versus the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which I have less confidence in after the last little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Well, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms limits whatever rights it says you have in them. So you don't have them. And it's the guarantor of them either. So it says they protect them and they come from them. But that's not what natural rights is. Natural rights theory or thinking is that you are born with these rights, and these rights are your property. They're absolute. They can be infringed upon, but they can't actually be taken away. And the government's role is to protect them from itself and through the three branches of government and your fellow citizens, also with the three branches of government. So like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I don't have it on me, but if you actually look that up and look up the USSR's document, whatever they called that, you will see that it's very similar to the USSR and very dissimilar to the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
So,
And I'll address James later, but MJ and Reader, can you continue talking to, I guess.
because is there a way to do that? To upscale the charter into actual something that means something? I'm sorry, I said the question wrong to you earlier.
No, that's okay, Reader, and I appreciate your question too, by the way. The only solution is revolution. I'm not going to beat around the bush. There's no democratic way out of this. Just like the American founders knew there's no democratic way out. You can go through the process first. This is part of it, I think. I'm not saying it's going to lead to revolution, but you can write letters to the crown and saying how displeased you are. That's what the American founders did first. But ultimately, that's not going to change anything.
And in reference to your first question there, Mr. Reader, I know you weren't addressing me, the guy from Ontario. That's fine. Me and Val have been discussing this two-question dilemma. So I'm glad that you've brought that up, and I don't want to get too far away from that before we go on to the next speaker. So I'd love to hear what Val and Vanessa have to say about these two questions that are being put forth.
Go ahead, Val.
In which context do you want to speak about them, Josh?
Well, Mr. Reader asked the question. So, Mr. Reader, which context would you like to speak about these two referendum questions?
Is it better for the process to have multiple questions, or should we be looking at one specific question as having a better opportunity to change the world?
All
Thank
right.
you.
So it's really important to distinguish between the two citizen-led initiatives. The one by, I think it's called Forever Canada, and the one by APP. They are two completely different types of citizen-led petitions. One is a legislative policy petition, which is the one by Forever Canada. And the goal of that type of petition is to change policy or suggest policy or within the legislation, the legislator building. Okay, so it's intended for individuals in Alberta who might want to change to policy or an act to be passed or suggestions on stuff to be able to gather signatures and have that changed. It does not mandate that a referendum question has to happen. That is not part of it. So this Forever Canada group can go out, get all the signatures it wants, have it go to the legislator. Danielle Smith and her team and every parliamentarian there can look at what's on it and then say, yep, we'll take it under advisement, and then they can put it in the garbage. That's one way they can deal with it. The other way is they could look at it and say, okay, well, what is this petition asking? Well, from my perspective, it is asking that the referendum questions surrounding separation be what they have stated in their question, okay? Which is something along the lines of, should Alberta, forever be a part of Canada, basically, okay? The other petition, the one by APP, is a constitutional petition. That one is mandated. It is obligated if signatures are gathered to have a referendum question posed to the Alberta people. So it has an additional step in which the question it proposes for the referendum question has to be, approved, I suppose, as to not violate Canada's constitution. And that's the process it's in right now. And the outline for why that petition is moving forward, that citizen-led petition is moving forward, is outlined in their application, and it proposes the referendum question itself, which is, should Alberta cease to be a part of Canada and be its own sovereign country? Something along those lines. Don't quote me. It's like that. So I look at the Forever Canada petition and I say, what is their goal here? They don't have an obligatory referendum question, and they're trying to change the potential referendum question of a different petition. How is that following any form of proper democratic process? You're literally trying to interfere with a separate petition, right? The second thing to note is that in the citizen-led petition law, you cannot have two questions on a referendum that are similar or interfere with each other. So it is my belief that the Forever Canada one is trying to become the petition or the referendum question, rather, in place of the other one, or to block APP's petition question from being on the referendum because they can't simultaneously be there. However, as I first pointed out, there are two different types of citizen-led petitions. So that's really up to whoever is going to decide, the chief electoral officer, as to whether or not those two interfere with each other, whether the Canada Forever one is attempting to subvert the other one, which, by the way, in the laws and policies about citizen-led initiatives, you are not allowed to have a citizen-led petition if its intent is to interfere in the democratic process.
Maybe we should get some more
So
hands, Vanessa.
that is my rundown on that.
And I appreciate your rundown on that. That was quite thorough, actually. MJ, I see you've had your hand up. I would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this so far?
Well, I mean, there is 5 ways to change the Constitution. I was just scrolling through the Constitution about a month ago, and I realized that Quebec went and added a Section 90Q1 that says Quebecers form a nation. They use Section 45 for that. And also said that French shall be the only official language of Quebec. It is a common language. And Saskatchewan did the same thing with 90S1, right? So I'm wondering, why is it that Alberta's not taking a look at the powers that they could harness under Section 45 and go and use that to go and deal with the issue? I mean, Saskatchewan basically saying they have autonomy with respect to all matters falling under its exclusive legislative jurisdiction pursuant to this act. So when I look at all of this, I see that there are a lot of ways that are hamstrings, and I see there are a lot of ways that are way through to be able to go and get certain things done. I mean, I understand, I was listening to the conversation in the beginning about changing the Constitution. Abolishing the Constitution, or abolishing the Senate, for example, I really think is a bad idea and all the way around, because if we take a look at history, Trudeau here would have been able to enact the Emergency Act without a second set of eyes saying, what the hell are you doing? Right? I mean, when that went on, Canadians reached out to the Senate and flooded them with messages and saying, please, for the love of God, don't let this man do this, right? So a sober second thought, well, we might dislike it. I think the better avenue, in my opinion, would be moving to an elected Senate, right? That would go and demolish the power of the Prime Minister appointing the current senators. And I think that would be a bigger coup d'etat for Alberta, because if I do the numbers right, based on 1 for 400,000, they would get 12 seats instead of the current 6. It would require a 750 amendment. However, it would be easier to do if you are bribing the East Coast provinces, the West Coast provinces, and Ontario and Quebec at the same time, right? So this is where we're at with trying to fix things in this country is, I think it was Steve that said the only way is to go more liberal. I mean, I don't know if an elected Senate is considered more liberalism, but it might be. After all, Australia went and did this. I don't know if it would solve any problems, but it would sure take away power from the Prime Minister's office to giving the recommendations to the Governor General to appoint the Senate. It's just one thought of where Alberta could move to.
What I meant was,
two thoughts.
sorry, what I meant was that you'll never get an amendment to the Constitution unless you go more progressive. You'll never get an amendment by bringing the country backward to conservatism. And I don't mean backward in thinking. I just mean back to conservatism.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. We'll move on to the next stand now.
Okay, Cameron, I see you have your hand up. What are your thoughts on the discussion so far this evening?
Well, it's been a great discussion. I only wish I would have noticed it sooner, so I would have caught you from the beginning. I appreciate a lot of the comments from Val and Steve and all of you, Josh. I agree with pretty much the bulk of them. Steve and his comments about the Constitution in terms of, if we were to happen to get to the day where we could actually amend the Constitution, I think that would be the direction we would go, just based on the Overton window shift in Canada. However, I do feel as though, I'm from Alberta, and I've been pushing for independence for Alberta for some time, and I do believe the Overton window in Alberta is shifting in the direction towards that sovereignty or independence. And so I'm a lot more optimistic here. And, I don't know how that's going to all play out, but I'm just happy the fact that it's moving in that direction. I always kind of had the belief that we need to do it incrementally with various things in terms of putting our own house in order first before we, make this big step. But my question would be to probably maybe to Val. I think she summarized it really well in terms of the two different referendums. And I'm just curious though, is there and I completely agree with her summary of how essentially what they're trying to do. They're ultimately we're trying to boycott or to sabotage the other referendum movement. And to that point, though, is there a way, do you think, that could actually backfire on them? Because, there it isn't really any kind of a binding constitutional, or, it's a policy one, right? So I think Albertans would be more inclined to vote against it. Like, I'm not 100% sure Albertans will vote in favor of leaving Canada at this point. I think it's been gaining momentum, but I don't know if it's there yet. But I think there's a far higher likelihood of them voting against, basically saying that we must stay in Canada. And so I just wanted your guys' thoughts of whether or not that kind of if it does get to a referendum, whether or not that could actually backfire.
That's really hard to say, right? Because the Forever Canada petition question, let's say it actually did get put on a referendum and then people had to answer it. It says, should Alberta forever remain in Canada and never pursue separation? I mean, who would say yes to that? You might say yes to it now because maybe you're riled up about, the separation sentiment in Alberta and you're super Canadian patriotic at this moment. But if you take a step back and you think about it, it's like, well, you're basically saying Alberta can never separate. And I mean, I don't even think you can fundamentally do that, because isn't the federal law and the Constitution basically says that, every province has a right to do so if it's not unilaterally. So, I mean, I don't even know if the provincial parliament, even if they did the referendum and it came back, yeah, Alberta can never separate from Canada, if it actually has any legs to stand on whatsoever. In terms of whether it can backfire, sure, because if you answer no, I mean, it doesn't really do anything if you answer no, does it? It just disappears. If it's answered yes, there's no legal obligation by the Parliament of Alberta to act on it either, because of the legislative policy type of referendum it is. You never know. Like, what if we're just speculating, right? So, like, what if that goes out there and people are really pissed off that someone is trying to make two referendum questions? You only need one referendum question, and the APP one is fine. If you don't believe in Alberta separation, you just put no, right? Like, it solves the problem. Like, the APP one is a pretty fair question. You just say no if you don't believe in it. The end, right? What are they scared
At
of,
this
right?
point, I would actually really like to hear what Mr. Holman has to say regarding this question because Steve actually did a whole podcast. Steve, is the APP question indeed fine?
No, and thank you for, because I was just looking for a post that I made, or I thought I nailed it a week ago, and it's not fine because they're still seeking approval from that in which they want to be declared independent from. So they should be declaring to themselves, that's all that matters, just to themselves, that they have a moral justification for leaving. So the Alberta Prosperity Project they're confused. They're not collecting signatures to show anything to the Crown. They're gathering signatures for their own self-governance. And they're no longer even recognizing the Crown's authority over them because they are independent, a free and independent state by right, and they ought to be so. And that's what they're missing. They're still clinging on to the authority of man instead of just going right to the supreme judge of the world, like like the Americans did in the Declaration of Independence. And that's where they got their justification for leaving. They're going above man and their reasons for doing so is because the Crown has infringed upon their rights. They broke the law. It's not Canada, the Albertans who are breaking the law by declaring this. It's a declaration that the Crown is guilty. And like they're almost there. I mean, they said, like Jeffrey Rath has said, that Canada has left us. We're not leaving them. I mean, they're so close to being there, but they're just still on the. It's ridiculous to phrase it that way, but it's like they're almost scared to cross the line into where they need to be.
Well, that seems to be the case with just about all of these proposals. They're close, but they're extremely far on every single one of these points. In terms of distance, for the first 5 subject matters, it's been distance with economic cost, investments, transition costs, debt, logistics, things of this nature. Now we're getting into when it comes to the constitutional amendments and what Daniel Smith aspires to have, and a lot of premiers aspire to have, is more control over natural resources. And there are some implications there if you want to be completely sovereign, in that you would have to establish new agreements, new trade agreements with other countries and things of this nature. You know, how that all works. So the point is, the first 5 subjects, there's been a big distance in terms of cost. Now this here is a big distance in terms of legal and really ideology. Most of these recommendations put forth for the constitutional amendments, the question's pretty much settled. So you have to get 7-50, 7 provinces, 50% of the population for just about every one of these amendments. And how many allies does Alberta actually have right now? Because it seems like all of these proposals, Saskatchewan, I don't know if BC's there, Manitoba's with Ontario, and then you got the Maritimes. So where are you getting your 7 provinces from? 1, where are you getting your 50% of the population from? 2, so if you can't get that, then you can't get any amendments at all. So, okay, settled. Now what do we have left? I guess we have this referendum question, and I would love to hear MJ's point regarding the constitutionality of this. And at this point, MJ, if you don't mind, could you just explain the constitutional likelihood and or the path that Alberta would have to take to separate completely? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, the other consideration that also needs to be brought into this conversation about Alberta is Alberta was in fact created by federal jurisdiction and legislation, the Alberta Act, right? That's federal legislation. Now, I know it might sound crazy, but when it comes to the centralization that we seem to be seeing from these governments, would it be above board for them to go and say, we're going to repeal the Alberta Act? Things wouldn't surprise me. But when it comes to changing the Constitution, there are 5 ways, right? There's where you go work with the feds and the provincial and the government for an issue relating to the one province, right? There's Section 45 where the provinces can just do things. And then there's the 10 by 10, 750, and I'd have to go and look at my notes again because I did go and make a note about it.
10 by 10,
and then there's a section
10, 750, and then there's legislative control of your own province, right? That's an opportunity as well.
Well, yeah, there's the federal parliament alone. Then there's a provincial legislature alone, and the other one is where if it's in relation to one province and then the federal government, there's that amending formula. So there's 5 methods to do this. Now the question becomes: is Alberta not looking at federal and provincial and just provincial, which is 2 sections of the Constitution to amend it, like the bilateral procedure is Section 43, right? So, I mean, when we take a look at all of these things, to me, there are ways to do this, right? But the question is do people understand the length and depth to be able to get there, right?
So speak to the referendum question, if you don't mind. Speak to the referendum question. Let's say it gets approved from the province. What's the path of the referendum question?
Okay, well, the referendum question then goes through step 2, which is a House of Commons motion, which is for them to go and decide, was the question clear and was it a clear majority? Now, here's the question, is what are they defining as a clear majority? 51% plus of the population? 51% of the people that voted? How are they deciding that? You see, that's not laid out clearly in the Clarity Act either. So step 2 is also a big hurdle. Then there's the negotiations in step 3, right? And that includes the First Nations, right? Because that goes and adds more complexity to all this. So when you start taking a look at all these different steps, before you even get to step 4, which is the constitutional amendment, right? Because there are things that are going to be requiring unanimous consent. And there's things that are just 750.
Right. So theoretically, let's say the referendum vote passed in Alberta, we would need another summit at that point, similar to Charlottetown, similar to Meech Lake, where all the provinces get together, headed by the Prime Minister. Let's make a deal. Let's get Alberta out of here, everybody, and we all need to vote in favor of it. MJ, I do want to point out just a little wrinkle here. Isn't it curious that the territories are not labeled in these legislations within these amendments? You notice that the territories are not mentioned.
Well, they fall under federal jurisdiction, even though they operate under using Section 92, which is the layout of provincial jurisdiction.
I just want to point out.
So there.
Sorry, Josh, I just want to point out for a second, because you jumped kind of to the negotiation phase. The one area where the federal government could prevent even getting to that stage, of course, is considering whether there has been a clear expression of a will by a clear majority and of the population of the province. And that's done by the House of Commons, and they're going to take into account the size of the majority of valid votes cast in favor of secessionist option. They're going to take into account the percentage of eligible voters voting in the referendum and any other matters or circumstances it considers to be relevant. It does not, in that formulation, mention anything about what is a magic number that you have to go and cross. It is really a mathematical formula. It seems to be, it's ambiguous. Now, I have heard talk about Quebec and Bill 99, and that has not been tested by the Supreme Court of Canada. That has so far been tested by a lower court and been found to be okay, because what they're doing is they're saying that a 50% plus 1 is a valid response by the people in internal Quebec referenda. This has no bearing on federal. So with federal, it would have this wild formula, which the result would be ambiguous. So I just wanted to throw that out there for you.
Well, we have a couple hands here. Who's had their hand up longer, Cameron or Reader? Go ahead, Reader. It's been a while.
No, that's Cameron.
Reader, go ahead. I called upon you. This is your opportunity.
All right, fine. I want to just go where Vanessa was going with Bill 99. It seemed to me that there's been some Alberta first legislation and then Saskatchewan first legislation that seemed to mirror what Bill 99 was doing in Quebec. My French is not strong enough to be sure of what I'm reading, and Google Translate's not something I want to trust, and so much as some of the people that you have on this panel, and especially yourself, Vanessa. Please, how close is Alberta or Saskatchewan to be mirroring what Quebec's done to allow itself to become separate and its own nation? Thank you.
I will be honest with you, I'm not as familiar with the Alberta First or Saskatchewan First legislation. I do know that Saskatchewan did make an amendment to using Section 45 of the Constitution to be able to insert it, but it's relevant to itself as a province. It does not affect the overall legislation of the national constitution. So I really I wish I had more information to be able to point at you for that. But I do know that there has been, as far as answering the question of what is a valid result for a referendum, specifically, Bill 99 addressed the ambiguity of the Clarity Act in this formulation that the Supreme Court and had kind of determined, but it does not have any effect on the national decision-making process. What the House of Commons does is separate, I'm afraid. Cameron, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I got a couple comments, and then I just want to kind of follow up on a previous kind of comment.
Keep it tight, buddy. You got like a minute.
Yeah, you bet. So, the referendum on in terms of what a majority is, it isn't clear in the Clarity Act. So, parliamentary convention's always been, I think, 50% plus one based on, Robert's rules and things like that. So, I think that was the barometer that was intended to be followed with respect to when Quebec did it. So, I would think it's the same for Alberta. Second thing I was going to mention was for the what Steve was mentioning about the actual pathway in terms of it being America's the way America did it. So my kind of question about Thomas Lukaszik's referendum backfiring, that is kind of an idea I had in the back of my mind was, is that a possibility? So Daniel Smith would, I presume if that does go forward, it'll be a strong no, a high percentage no, well in the majority, or at least well over 50%. And so if it was that, would that be then the kind of the backing Smith could use to go that route that Steve mentioned in the same respect as what America did? And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Okay, well, just to quickly go over here, because you did mention the 50% plus one. Now, that is regarded as a simple majority under Robert's Rules of Order, and even, I would imagine, under the rules that the House of Commons uses. Generally speaking, in order to indicate a more clear majority, you're looking at 2/3, but that's not specified in the Clarity Act itself. Of course, there's no number. I do want to point out there is a section in there where it does say specifically, whereas the Supreme Court of Canada has stated that democracy means more than a simple majority rule, that a clear majority in favor of secession would be required to create an obligation to negotiate secession, and that a qualitative evaluation is required to determine whether a clear majority in favor of secession exists in the circumstances. So this is part of where the Clarity Act is in this formulation, where the House of Commons will make a decision on whether or not a clear majority is exhibited by the size of the majority of valid votes, the percentage of eligible voters voting in the referendum, and any other matters or circumstances. That's where not having a definitive number is problematic. So I'm just going to throw that out there for clarity for people Anyway, Steve, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think you're being or telling the whole impossibility of it, Vanessa, because it says it's a in the Clarity Act, it says a clear expression of a will by a clear majority of the population of a province. I don't see where it says eligible voters or those who have voted. It says the entire population of the province. And then it also says that the House of Commons shall take into account the views of all political parties represented in the Legislative Assembly of the province whose government proposed the referendum. So that means they're going to go and talk to the NDP, and that they're basically representing the people in Edmonton and Calgary, where all the people are. And then there's also any formal statements or resolutions by the government or legislative assembly of any province or territory of Canada. Any formal statements or resolutions by the Senate, and that's what I said, the Senate is not going to let the whims of a few people, 51%, trample all over the rights, even if you don't have them. But if you will, of the minority there, if they lose at 49, and then any formal statements or resolutions by the representatives of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, especially those in the province whose government proposed the referendum. So even the Aboriginal nations that are in Ontario and anywhere else there may be found, all their views matter too. And then on top of that, the House of Commons needs to agree that all of those people have a unanimous consent that a province can leave. Like, that is never going to happen. That's just a pipe dream. Like I said, and to answer the question that MJ said about all the things that Quebec has done too, is that it's all in name only. None of it means anything. You can call yourself whatever you want to call it. Call yourself. And Canada is Leviathan, which means you can believe whatever you want to believe, obey. Like, you're never going anywhere. Not democratically, that is. So you call yourself in. So if you vote on this, Alberta does, and they get it, they can call themselves independent all they want. It's just a name only. It's not going to mean anything.
Okay, just in case, because you couldn't find it, when you're looking at the Clarity Act, if you look at the title Factors for House of Commons to Take into Account, that's where you're going to see where they're going to decide whether a clear majority of the population has expressed their will. So just want to throw that out there for clarification. Okay, I've lost track. MJ or Val, whoever had their hand up first.
It's been a while for Val. Go ahead, Val.
Just to throw another wrench into the works here, there's the other side of what APP might do, or any particular group that believes in Alberta independence once a referendum happens, and let's assume that the answer on the referendum ends up yes. And that is to take it to the international stage and to attempt to be recognized specifically by the United States or other countries as a province that is wanting to have sovereignty over itself. So there's another aspect to this, which I know the APP will attempt to follow, as well as many other separatist groups might try and go in that direction as well. They will try every angle, so you can be guaranteed they will try and get that. And there's been interest from the United States, and behind closed doors, there have been promises made and small little deals being rendered. So don't discount the fact that while I don't believe many in Alberta would want to unilaterally secede and break Canadian law, but that the possibility of something like that occurring still exists.
I think that possibility would involve breaking the law, in that if this referendum vote was not acknowledged and or summarily dismissed by the process, the federal constitutional process we have here in Canada, and a lobby group were to petition to the international community outside of the confines of Canadian law and obtain recognition, there are various terms that could be applied to that, and that is met with very harsh punishment by the government.
There's certainly consequences, right? Absolutely. It would be a unusual territory, to say the least, especially in first world countries.
I'll give you an
But it is
example. I'll
certainly
give you an
possible
example
that
of
it happened.
I'll give you an example of it working. You could say that the United Nations Declarations of the Rights of Indigenous People is a form of acknowledgement that the Indigenous community can appeal to. So that's an example of an international body having a communique with the Indigenous in this example. So there's that, anyways.
Well, there's better examples because there's actual countries out there who have gone through a vote process and then been internationally recognized, specifically by the United States, and then have obtained sovereignty despite what their country's laws initially were. So I'm not saying that's what will happen, but I'm saying there's that angle to it and that it will be pursued.
You didn't want to name a country? You said you had a specific example. Name some countries.
I'll let you do your own homework on that, Josh.
That's weak.
Gobble, gobble.
I
We
think she
all know
means
what
like
those
Norway and
examples
Sweden
are.
or whatever that was.
Well, if I may,
I don't
please.
know.
If I may, please.
Please, MJ.
I believe it was. Go ahead, MJ.
I just want to bounce off what Val was saying. And see, here's the thing: is I did go and get into a communication with Keith Wilson, and him thinking that he's always right, and I'm wrong because he's a lawyer and I'm not. I said in the Supreme Court reference, it says that the Supreme Court stated that none of these conditions applied to Quebec or any other province at the time when this was said. A right of succession arises under the principle of self-determination of a people's only where a people is governed as part of a colonial empire. Well, Canada is a colonial empire. Where a people is subject to alien subjugation, which they are, domination, or exploitation, and possibly where a people is denied a meaningful exercise of its right to self-determination within the state from which it forms a part. Okay? Now, when you go and take a look at that as a whole, and you go back to the international law that clarifies this, we could say, and we could go and provide proof of what that Supreme Court said, right? Our Supreme Court said this, because when they made the determination that that's not so. But Canada is, in fact, still a colonial empire, part of the colonial empire, right? It still follows the colonial jurisdiction. So, in that of a case, it's still that the UN had a thing put out years ago, I think in the 50s, of the right of self-determination and ending colonialism. So, in fact, by Alberta being denied the right to go and exercise its right to independence, it would then immediately fall under the international law, which I just quoted.
Who was that? Was that MJ or Cameron? I see some things going
That was
with Cameron.
MJ.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, the UN is not going to favor any kind of a conservative effort to be independent. That's what you're missing there. And you're also missing that Alberta's not a people's, and for one thing, I mean, you can move in and out of there. You're not people's. That means more like if there was occupied territory at one time of Indigenous peoples, you got to read these things with how they would read it, and that's what they mean. Like your own interpretation of that means nothing. They don't care at all.
Well, I could be very well wrong, right? But here's the thing, is once they have a referendum and they have a clear majority and then they're denied the right to leave, then what?
But they don't have a right to leave, though, without going through what everybody, like the things I just mentioned, right? There's no right to leave. They're not a people's. I mean, it's just a province. I mean, I don't get it. I really don't get what people are expecting here.
Well, this is a common, like, there are other countries that have undergone something like this as well, where it wasn't necessarily one distinct group in culture compared to the other distinct group in culture in the country, and then they split. There have been countries that have had separation happen within their country of the total. Okay, so it has happened before. You know, there's Bosnia, Taiwan. There's a whole bunch of places that this has happened. Now, I'm not saying that that would apply in first world countries or without some type of conflict, which I'm not advocating for. I'm just saying it's possible and very likely that if a referendum did happen and the answer was yes, that those options would be pursued. And we have no idea what the consequences of that would be. Alberta is a very, very rich province. It has a lot of resources. I think the United States might take a double look at whether or not recognizing sovereignty or supporting it in some way or making deals with Alberta might be in their best interest. And we'll just have to wait and see.
They already fought a civil war over this. I mean, they're never going to let. Then that sets a precedent that a state can just leave by unanimous declaration too. And like Taiwan, I mean, China has no right to claim that over Taiwan. That's what's going on there. I don't know about the Bosnia situation, but it's way different. I mean, we're not a different people, and we're not even on an island. We're in the middle of a country, basically. You're not quite in the middle, but you know what I mean.
Right. And the reason I didn't want to name all of these is because, yeah, every situation is quite unique. I'm just pointing out that it has happened. It's not like that a place within a country separating is like completely absurd and has never happened. It's happened thousands of times in centuries. Like it's not like it's impossible. It does occur, right? So we'll just have to wait and see how it happens.
Go ahead, MJ.
Right. You know, we will have to wait and see. And when it comes to all of this, I mean, people have to remember we are in fact a federation and not a confederation, right? Regardless of what anyone says, puts into any documentation to suggest that we are a federation, we're not. How can you be a confederation when the overarching organization is the monarchy and the crown, going and pulling the strings from above, right? You can only be a federation. So that's what we're at. So leaving is a bigger question on leaving from a federation.
Yeah, so there's a lot of silence here. I'm not sure if I'm being heard right now. Val, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Gobble gobble. Can you hear me? Gobble.
Gobble
All right.
gobble.
I can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay,
Gobble
good.
over.
So this being MJ, were you going to say something?
I was going to say no, I can't hear you.
Okay, so I'm not sure where you guys want to go next with this conversation. Do you guys want to wrap, or what other layer is there to discuss here?
Well, have you guys discussed the collection of your own income tax in previous spaces?
Yes, we have. The space just before this one, we went over Alberta collecting personal income tax.
Okay, yeah, I missed that one. Damn it, sorry. That's to me. If Alberta wants to start talking about sovereignty, that's the first place to go, is take control of your money. Because you remember what the government does to you is when they give your money back to you, they go and put the terms and conditions and attachments, which, on your own money. And that's the biggest problem. Solve that problem first, and you've got a level of sovereignty. Take a look at Quebec. They control their money.
Well, you're quite correct about that. Quebec in 1947 pulled out, along with Ontario, from the federal tax program. They decided they were going to collect at source. And so Quebec does actually do two income tax forms at tax time, not just one. But the ability to collect taxes directly means that, yes, they're not waiting for the federal government to send it back in transfer payments, although they still get transfer payments either way. It does mean you don't have that extra wait time for your other stuff. You can better fund your programs. You're not waiting. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I would just add, I mean, the first step to independence is actually being different from that which you want to be independent from. And that's not what Alberta is. They think they are, but they love healthcare just as much as the rest of the country and all these other social, universal healthcare, that is, just like the rest of the country. And that's all what equalization payments are about. It's to provide, is to fund all these social services in the other provinces of the have-nots. So until like you're actually different from that way of thinking, then you're not a different peoples. It's just that you're upset that you're on the have end instead of the have not end.
Go ahead, Cameron.
Well, I beg to differ a little bit on what Steve just said there. I'm completely opposed to all the social welfare system. I think there's a lot of us in rural Alberta that are also against it and want to move back towards a system that of like Abraham Kuyper talked about, where you have the three spheres of sovereignty, and they don't overlap nearly as much as they do right now. Where you have government, in charge of law, you have the church in charge of the church, and you have the family in charge of the family. And I think the momentum is starting to go that way here. I know it. There's still a lot that do like their social programs, but I think they're starting to show there's a lot of chinks in the armor there with respect to education, with respect to healthcare and all that. The education really started to change during COVID. You start, and even the healthcare side of things, you start seeing a lot more people homeschooling their kids. We have in Alberta far more charter schools and homeschool kids than in most of the rest of the country. I'm quite confident of that. And I think if we continue I'm not saying that tomorrow this is going to change, but I'm saying that kind of momentum, maybe it's still 20 years away, but as that type of system develops and we push for that more, I think you will see a distinct and separate Alberta that is different from a lot of the rest of Canada. And I'll leave it there.
That's an excellent point, right? A lot of the proposed items, even in the Alberta Next panel, there's so many of them. The reality is that it will take a very long time to implement any of these that are approved as well. So you're looking at decades of change and reform, hopefully for the better, right? Go ahead, Cass. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I definitely disagree with the healthcare comment, because I know a ton of Albertans that would give up socialized healthcare. It's not. It doesn't really save you tons of money, honestly. Like, we did the math in another space, and like, for example, I'm taxed about $23,000 or $24,000 a year in income tax. And I pay, like, we did the math for healthcare, and about $9,300 about that goes towards healthcare. And that's, yeah. So like that right there, I haven't been to the hospital since 2007 or 8. So like all those years, I'm still paying for this, but I haven't been. I've never had any issues. So I'm basically just paying healthcare for other people. And so yeah, totally. I would rather have people be personally responsible for their own healthcare. Or at least have the option to where you can pay for your own healthcare. Honestly, because you get better options. You'd have lower wait times, and so on and so forth. I don't understand anybody that thinks we have a great healthcare system. We definitely don't, and there's a ton of examples of that. I honestly don't think, especially with the amount of money that Alberta would have as a sovereign nation, I don't think they would miss social health care whatsoever. Honestly, I think they'd have a much better. It'd probably take a few years to get it up and running, but once doctors and nurses and everybody sees like the benefits of being in Alberta, being a doctor and nurse in Alberta as a sovereign nation, I think they would flock there. Alberta's a beautiful place to live. I've been lucky to live there, and yeah, if you can definitely make more money, is like when it comes down to it, you want to be a doctor to help people. Unfortunately, you also want to be a doctor to make money. and we lose all of our best doctors. They all go down to the States, and that's a shame. A lot of nurses too. They all go down to the States because guess what? They want to live a good life for what they do, as they should. They should be rewarded for that. You should not be punished, for making a lot of money, unfortunately. And a lot of doctors are, so they go down to the States, they help a lot more people, and they make a lot more money. That's just how it is.
Are you from a rural area or the cities?
I'm from Nova Scotia, but I've lived all over. I've been living in every province except for Nunavut and Newfoundland, and I know a lot of people that do not like our social healthcare system. I can tell you that.
Rural area or the cities?
What do you mean currently?
Yes.
Currently, I guess I'm in rural. I guess you could say rural.
Yeah. Okay. And so Cameron sounds like a Reformed Christian, or he's at least among those kind of groups. So you're gonna know more people who think that way. But if you go to these cities, I mean, they're filled with liberals. Edmonton and Calgary. I mean, and Airdrie and all these bigger places, and they're all much more socialist than whatever you're going to find in the rural areas.
Yeah, but that's actually my point, is that they think our healthcare system is free. Like I've been in liberal spaces quite a bit where like they think healthcare is free and they brag about it. And it's like, man, like you don't get it. Like you just don't understand. And you try to explain it to them and there's just no way. It's just impossible.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what? We're coming up to the 2 hour mark, and I think we've covered everything that needs to be covered as far as the question of Alberta pursuing constitutional reforms. I'm going to ask my panelists for one final thought here, and then I'm going to wrap up the space. So we'll start with Josh.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa, and well done, Vanessa and Val, the two hosts of this excellent expedition. We've learned so much, and I'm very grateful for having the opportunity to kind of be with Alberta on this, kind of get a grassroots feel for how Albertans perceive federal injustice and what options they have in front of them. And it's very encouraging. It's encouraging in the sense that people actually have dreams. And whether the dream can happen or not is besides the point. It's just important to actually have a dream to look forward to. The concept of dreaming for me is within Canada as a union and also as a subject of the crown. But that does not mean we have a conflict. It just means we have dreams. And it was just a pleasure to analyze the political options that Daniel Smith and Albertans have been managing for a long, long time. So with that, I'll land there. Vanessa, excellent job as a host. You did the discourses proud. Well done. And thank you again, Val, for being a great co-host. Your first job, first series as co-host, and it is what it is. You did a great job. Well done, ladies.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. Really do appreciate you being on the panel and giving your thoughts on this and providing the alternate viewpoint that prevents us from turning into an echo chamber. So your contributions are very much welcome and have been, and it's been a pleasure to have you on the panel. Steve, I'd like to hear some final thoughts from you on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to thank you, Vanessa and Val, for hosting too. I thought you did a wonderful job, and Vanessa, you wrote a whole book in 6 weeks. That's nothing short of amazing. My view on this is, it hasn't changed from the beginning. The Berlin X panel is just Danielle Smith looking to see what stance she should take to get reelected on any of these issues. She doesn't really care about the outcomes, and a lot of it's unlikely, like the ones we talked today, mostly unlikely anyways. And yeah, I'll leave it at that, short and sweet. Thanks again for hosting these 6 weeks and for inviting me. It means a lot.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate your contribution because you're definitely bringing it from a different angle than most even Albertans are looking at it from. This is a little bit beyond just separation. You've got a more of a American revolutionary aspect to it. So that's been quite fascinating to listen to your standpoints on this, and I appreciate it very much. And thank you so much for being on the panel. Val, my co-host, what are your final thoughts on how this has all gone?
Well, Vanessa, it's been an absolute joy having you as host. Phenomenal job. And panelists, it's been very interesting to have different opinions and sides on stuff to debate and talk about. I think it's been very eye-opening for myself and hopefully others. Hopefully others have taken away some information and thoughts about this as well. As we went through our Alberta Next panel discussions and our different various topics, I certainly learned a lot more about the complexities in attaining change within Canada and what Alberta proposes to do. And the more I went through it, obviously I had a general understanding, but the more I went through it, the more I realized just how overwhelming the power dynamics are between Alberta and the federal government. And I have actually been pushed further into the belief that the only way to actually make effective change is to push the Alberta independence forward, and it might be the only option for Alberta. If not, at least it highlights the fact that there are these mass complications in between provincial jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction, and my hope is that some good change will come out of this for all of Canada. So thank you again for having me. I hope that we do this again in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Val, for contributing, especially when it comes to the finance aspect. When we've gone through and looked at, for instance, the Alberta pension plan, federal transfers, and the Alberta, provincial income tax, your contribution, your knowledge background is just been absolutely invaluable, and I, really appreciate that, and I'm very thankful that you were willing to be on the panel and help discuss this over 6 weeks. And for myself, at least, anyways, I approach this entire project as a skeptic. I have always been on the fence. I have reservations about how the Alberta Next panel was going forward, as well as the other side of things, which would be the Alberta Prosperity Project and the quest for independence. So the advantage of having done these spaces is that it's forced me into a standpoint where I've had to do a lot of background research into how we got here. A lot of what I've gone through is the history of things, and plus as well some of the mechanisms of how they actually work. And that has been really an education in itself. And what it does is it reinforces to me exactly how much I don't know. And when it comes to the questions that the Alberta Next panel is putting out to the people who are participating in these surveys, when you look at the advertisements, plus all the work that I've done to kind of make myself more knowledgeable and informed, it really does demonstrate a lack, I would say, of communication. It's inadequate. So I'm very interested now at this point in time to see what the results are of the Alberta Next panel survey. And when those come out, I think at that point in time, we should reconvene our panel and discuss that. How do you feel about that, you guys?
Good.
I'm in.
It's a date. Great. Good idea.
Sounds like it will be a very interesting conversation for sure.
Yes, because this is what I'm finding quite interesting. The conversation is evolving as each panel happens. So it'll be interesting to see, from where we start, how it finishes. So I do appreciate everybody willing to come back and, examine the results of the survey then. Anyway, I do want to finally say thank you to all my panelists again for participating and joining me on this 6-week voyage, and especially to all of our listeners who've joined us week after week to participate in the conversation and listen to us as we, of course, explore the topic from various different standpoints. So you are amazing, and I really appreciate you joining us on this journey. So until next time, when the results from the Alberta Next panel come back, everybody have a great night, and we'll see you in online in some other spaces. Have a great one, guys.
Wonderful. Thanks, Vanessa.